You are listening to the Better 2 podcast with DM Needom. Hi gang, Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. Welcome to all my new listeners, and hi to the old gang. And welcome to season 3. Yes, season 3. Hard to believe that we are here, considering that it started in March. Today's guest, he has a very interesting tale. His name is Gary Fahey, and he started out in the police department in Australia. He's actually from Brisbane. And he climbed up the ranks to becoming the Prime Minister's head of security, which is a pretty big deal. And then he moved on to another position. But during this time, Gary had a problem. Gary needed an escape. Just like all of us, we all find ways to have an escape. His escape was something of, it wasn't the bottle and it wasn't illicit drugs. He liked to bet on races, and to the tune of $2 million of his own money, roughly. However, even though he was trying to get help and he knew he had a problem and he stopped and he came back again, like it happens to us, he ended up getting caught because of one charge on his business card that kind of set in an internal investigation and sent him on a really, really wild ride of getting caught, going to trial, and almost deciding life wasn't worth living. While this journey sounds dark, it ultimately has a path of growth to it, as most stories do. So definitely listen and tune in. Hi, Gary. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks, Donna. How are you?
I'm doing okay. And you're in Brisbane? Is that correct?
I am in Brisbane. Yeah, sunny Brisbane.
Sunny, huh? It's dark here, but you're all the way across the world. So there we go. So
that's it.
Basically, let's talk about this. I know your history, and I did do some research on you online, of course. So you were in charge of the Prime Minister's security. You were his head of security, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Before we get into the Better 2 moment and everything, I have a question. What is it like to put yourself in a position where you know that you may have to put your life on the line like that? That you have to protect this person above your own life? What makes you decide to do that?
Yeah, look, it's probably an interesting question that I should have delved into long before I decided to take the job. It's probably not something that actively goes through your mind before you take it on. It's certainly something that comes up in discussions. Look, primarily, I always like to think of it that if I did my job properly, then the chances of me actually having to put my life on the line were going to be, zero to very minimal. So I always try to focus on it in that sense. From a deeper perspective, it's not, I never considered it putting your life on the line for a particular individual, but more for, your way of life. And I used to tell people I protect the office of Prime Minister. It was an individual, but, the individual, much like the president of the US and, prime ministers and presidents around the world, they represent far more than the individual. It's the office that was most important. So, in some ways you feel like it's bigger than you anyway. So it's an important enough job, but yeah, in reality, I don't think we really think it through before we say yes. And we hope that we do our job well enough to not have to worry about
it. Do you feel it's kind of I guess the mental health term would be hero complex?
Yeah, a little bit. Look, there's definitely people out there that are sensation seekers. Some people jump out of planes, some people bungee jump, some people do downhill skiing. There's definitely an element of rush to the job. There's often a lot of boredom to the job as well. But there is an elevated rush to getting everything right in short spaces of time, and knowing that, you know, in some places the ultimate result is, you know, is as high a cost as what it is. And, you know, in my former life, I was very much a, you know, I suppose an alpha guy. I wanted to be the guy that was good enough to, you know, to do that job. And it was important to me. And, you know, it may have had some part to play in where I ended up next, but it's something I would definitely do over as in terms of that job. It was a fascinating role. It was enjoyable. It was hard, but it was yeah, it was a really good time.
Do you think movies kind of glamorize it?
Movies very much glamorize it. You know, I think what they probably do is they take small elements of it and blow them up to the nth degree. And, you know, they're not, some movies are obviously incorrect, but they're not too far wrong, except that they really take the extreme of where it could be. So, you know, that's probably what gets you excited about being a part of it as well. You know, you do see them in Hollywood movies, and you think, you know, one day I could be that person, or you know, that is me. And you know, there's you know, if I was being honest, there's a little bit of that in there. You know, it feels nice to, you know, to have achieved. As for anybody in their job, that wasn't the job I started in, and you know, it becomes a you know, like becoming the CEO of the company, or like taking a, you know, a book to bestseller, or anything like that. It's a culmination of years of hard work, and I think that's the reward rather than the excitement of the job.
Understand. I recently watched on Netflix, and I think it's a BBC show, Bodyguard, and it was pretty intense. It was a very well written show, but you know, and I'm sorry if these questions seem a little awkward. My dad's a fireman, and I have never sat down and asked him and said, okay, Dad, what, I mean, when I've asked my dad about why he took the job, he's like, well, it had health care and it was a good payday and your mom was pregnant with you and it was stability. I never have asked him, well, what made you think it was a good idea to rush into a burning building? Never did I think. He got the key to the city because he saved somebody. But still, what goes through your mind? I mean, you're putting, you know, that's why I guess I pose those questions to you, because it's like, I'm sure there are people that are listening. They're like, what makes somebody want to do this? And I know you started out as a police officer, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's part of our you know, the police agency that I worked for. It was one of the roles that you could do in there. But yes, I started as a police officer.
So, all right, now let's start moving into what happened. So you're in charge of the Prime Minister's security. From what I understand, from what I had done some research, you were given a charge card.
Correct.
And you took that line of credit and you did other things with it than what you were supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. There's, I suppose we've got to fast forward a couple of years from the working with the Prime Minister's team. So after that, I, you know, had a couple of other jobs with the federal police, but I ended up, the job at the time I was doing was the executive officer to the commissioner. So I was running the commissioner's office, the commissioner of the Australian Federal Police. And all of the police officers were, you know, afforded the trust of having a charge card, a credit card for their work business. And I had one that I used quite regularly. Is that a friend of yours?
That is Cammy. That is my puppy. And see what's going. Sorry to interrupt. The cat is outside of the bathroom, and she's trying to antagonize the cat so they'll chase each other. Sorry.
I'm sure she makes it. That's all right. I'm sure she makes a visit on a few of your podcasts.
Oh yeah, okay. The cat usually will. The cat will usually show up, but the dog usually just barks occasionally, but not very often. But sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so I was running the commissioner's office at the time, and you know, that afforded me a lot more trust, I suppose, with expenditure. I had to pay for a lot more things. I paid for things when we travelled, even things as simple as coffees and lunches and those sorts of things. But ultimately, it was probably the back end of a 10-year battle with a 10-year battle with a gambling addiction. I was later diagnosed with a major depressive disorder and a gambling addiction. And, you know, that gambling addiction cost me $2 million. It ultimately cost me my career, you know, my reputation. And certainly I was considering the value of my own life, when I was going through those moments. But for the, I gambled away $2 million, mostly of my own money. And the last year and a half, I made some very silly decisions with my corporate credit card, and about $45,000 of those charges I wasn't able to acquit, and they were used, to not necessarily to fund gambling, but certainly to fund my food, my expenses, because I used all my money for gambling. So it's not very easy to stay a police officer when you make mistakes like that, and ultimately that was the end of my career.
So what do you think, or after I know you've been in therapy and stuff, what do you think made you decide to gamble?
Look, I've been gambling since I was 8. My earliest memory of gambling on my own was 8 years old.
Wow.
But look, I'll be honest, I've just released a book, and I talk about it in there where I say that gambling was an escape for me. I understand the science behind, if we start things early, the chances of it becoming an addiction, they do increase. But, I probably had a sip of my dad's beer, at 4 or 5. I had my first cigarette when I was 8. My mum would take me shopping with her when I was younger. So I did a lot of things when I was younger that I don't have an addiction to. I rarely drink, I don't smoke. So I'm not entirely sure that merely the early exposure is as significant as what might be made out, certainly not in my case. But what I found was, as I was suffering with depression, I was in a high risk, high profile, high responsibility role. And I suffered from depression. I also suffered from anxiety. And when everything got too much, gambling was a place that I could escape to. And I describe it as it was a place where I could turn the noise off, the noise that was in my head, whether it was work, relationships, trouble at home. It was the one place that worked 100% of the time. Training would work sometimes, music would work sometimes, but it came to a point where gambling was the only thing that would work every time that I needed to escape. And that's primarily why why I got deeper and deeper in. It was an escape I was looking for, and I wasn't capable of making better decisions around what I needed for my own health, and I made bad mistakes around my decisions there.
So it was really more about rewarding. I mean, as the escape is there, yes, but what kind of gambling were you doing? Were you racetrack betting? Were you going to a casino? What type of gambling? I mean, like, I know people that have like a slot machine addiction. It's the lights and everything else. I mean, my dad, from what I understand, he doesn't live near me. He likes playing online slots. And he'll just sit there. My stepmom talks about how he'll sit there for hours, and just because of the lights, he can't hear. So it's just the lights, and that mesmerizes him. And I'm sure it's an escape for him. So what was your, dare I say, your gambling of choice?
Yeah, for me, it was horse races, greyhound races, trotting races. It was rarely poker machines or slot machines. I played them, but that wasn't a part of my my vice, I suppose. For me, it was betting online. So we have bookmakers that you can use your phone, and you can bet online, watch the races online, and that became my escape. And I certainly understand the research around neural pathways, and even the way that slot machines are wired to provide intermittent dopamine releases with lights and all of that sort of stuff. But genuinely, for me, it was a lot less about winning. It was a lot less about recouping lost funds. And it did manifest that I was gambling more and greater amounts. But if I only had $10, I would bet $1 bets, and if I had $1,000, I would bet $100 bets. It wasn't necessarily the money being the primary stoker for it. It was the escape of 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours of literally having nothing else to, as I said, the noise would turn off. The white noise in my head would stop, and that was probably the reward I was chasing when I wasn't able to be honest with myself about what was going on.
So as it starts going south, as things start turning south, how did you, I mean, did you feel, dare I say, the walls closing in? Were you well aware that I'm about to be found out, or did you just come clean?
No, I got found out. I was, I'd like to say I was beginning the process to work myself through it. I had started some therapy prior to being found out. I had always rationalized in my head, it was a poor rationalization, but that once I could get on top of it, I would then, speak to my commissioner and speak to the boss about what had happened and come clean. In truth, there's no way for me to really know whether I was being honest with myself about that. I was lying to myself about so many things over a long period of time that, I was telling myself that story, but whether that was true, I wouldn't know. I always said to people that I always knew I was struggling, but I didn't know with what, and I knew even less what to do about it. And I'd sought help for gambling in the past, and I'd stopped gambling for long periods of time, but it always came back, and probably much less. I probably consider it much less a relapse and more a manifestation of not fixing the real problem, and then it just became my escape again. I was never able to dig deeper, look past what I call the problem in the mirror, and actually try and solve the deeper issue of of what was going on and what was leading me to that gambling. So, I always used to rationalize that the money I used, there were a lot of times where I'd use my own money to pay for work expenses. And so in my mixed up mind, I would rationalize that it kind of evens out and, I'll get it back at some stage and I'll pay this. And so, I was telling myself lies as much as everybody else, but ultimately I got found out because of a charge that looked odd on my account, and then we went down the path of investigations, and I largely come clean. I mean, I pled guilty to the charges that I had to face. It was clear, and by that time I'd already started doing my own work anyway. So it was a much better scenario for me personally, not in the criminal matter, but in my own headspace, that I was able to be honest and start to move forward.
Now, in your write up to me, you had mentioned that you had gone down a very, very dark path and that you had thought about ending it all.
Yeah, that's correct. That's probably about a year after I got caught from work, a year after I'd left work. Things had started to die down. I'd stopped gambling for about 6 months, and I actually had started again by this time. I sort of just got to the point where a couple of things culminated. One was I started to doubt my ability to actually beat it. I'd given up for 6 months, 3-4 times over a 10-year period, and I was back to it again. And I thought, even after losing, an 18-year career, being, humiliated and losing everything almost that I had, that still wasn't enough for me to stop or be able to do the work needed to stop. And I got to the point where I thought, well, I can't beat this. This is not working for me. At the same time, I was charged by the police, and that was some 12 months later. And my story got put in the paper, in the newspaper. My family saw it. My partner at the time, we'd just moved house, and where we lived was put into the paper, not the address, but the town. The kids were in a new school, and I thought, look, I'm probably doing more harm to people by being here than not. That was the thought that I went through, and that was really scary to me. And then thankfully I provided myself enough space to say, well, I can't do this. I can't do this. I need to find something else. So I took myself off to the doctor and started a new process of doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, and worked on a few other things. And that ultimately became the first point in my, in my rejuvenation. that probably culminated 9-12 months later.
I noticed when I did do some research, I did notice that in the papers, though, that it wasn't necessarily always attacking you. They were attacking the fact that you had mentioned that you had this addiction and that that the police force did not offer you any help, that there was a lot of uproar about that. Go ahead.
There's probably two angles to the stories that did come out. Certainly the first lot prior to me pleading guilty were all focused on me. They were a lot shorter articles, I suppose, but with everything online these days, I say to people, when I read it, I felt like the whole world knew. In reality, it was probably on, page 24, 2 paragraphs, in a paper nobody read. But when I saw it, I just believed that everybody in the world knew about it. And so the first half of the stories were all about the Commissioner's executive officer, the guy who used to be the Prime Minister's protection team leader, gambling $50,000 of the government's money. After I had been through the process and going through court and had actually started to build my new business and working with people on their own struggles, there was a couple of articles that rightfully did indicate that AFP were aware of my gambling issues. I probably had made admissions to them as far back as 2007, 2008, somewhere around there. To be fair, they were all in secret discussions with, in terms of getting clearances, top secret clearances and those sorts of things. So how much responsibility those people have, that's for other people to answer and not me. But yes, I had had conversations with people at the AFP for about almost 10 years about gambling issues. Probably the most recent ones were about 3-4 months before I got found out as well. So it was something that was known. I won't say it was well known, and perhaps the people that did know weren't at liberty to share it, given their roles. But there was 2 distinct styles of reporting about my procedure. And look, hopefully in the future it will get even more positive. That something positive has come out of the path that I had to go through.
I find it interesting that you're telling them this, and it's regarding security clearance, and they still said, "Oh, okay, we'll give you security clearance." I mean, that's a very interesting concept, because working in insurance, we had to vet people when I was a supervisor. And this one girl got hired. She went through the whole vetting process, and then she got busted because she had cut some fake checks to fake claims.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand that you get a limited amount of authority depending on your position. So I understand. And if somebody would come to me and tell me I have an addiction, a gambling addiction, the last thing we're going to do is give them authority. So that kind of just blows my mind that they were willing to go, "Hey, okay, sure, here you go."
Yeah, I think, look, I think to be fair to the process, and this might be, me trying to justify it for myself, it's that a large part of our clearance process is about being honest, and less about what the problem is. The less honest you are, the more open you become to, to manipulation or external manipulation. Any gambling I had done had, for most of those points, only ever been done with my money or credit, I suppose, that have been provided by, my home loans to me from banks, not bookmakers or sharks or, anything outside of that, outside of traditional lending facilities. And I was on a pretty decent wage as well. A lot of the gambling, was able to be covered until the last couple of years. So, if I was, to support them, that's probably the line that they took. And I'd like to think that, in all apart from my own personal gambling issues, I was still a person that was worthy of the clearances that I got. But, as I said, that's probably more for other people to decide. And I certainly had 10 years of top secret clearances that never were questioned. And thankfully, I was able to uphold the responsibilities of those as well.
I applaud you for that. It's just one of those things where you think about how you hear once again, television or books, the bad guys blackmail the person who has the gambling addiction, and so that's why it's like, okay, but you obviously,
and it's certainly a danger. It
Yeah.
is certainly a danger. If I had borrowed money off a loan shark, off a bookmaker, or outlaw motorcycle gang member, you've got a completely different scenario, I think. And so I can certainly see that, and that does happen. That some of those stories on TV and movies, they are, that does happen. Thankfully, it didn't happen to me, and I don't know where it would have ended up. I'd like to think it would never have ended up there, but again, we never know.
How did your family handle all this?
Look, that's probably the toughest part of the whole process, to be honest, for me. My partner at the time, we're no longer together, and it was, this sort of behaviour that led us to not be together anymore. And but at the time, she was supremely supportive. Going into bat for me, I probably, wasn't able to be as honest with her as I would have liked to have been, but she also worked at in the federal police, and so it was extremely difficult for her to go to work knowing that people were talking about me. And before that time, she had known that I had historic gambling issues, but again, I've been masking those for a little while. So she was extremely supportive, and that was something that was that I'll always be grateful for, because I think in that first few months, 12 months, without that support, I'm not sure that things wouldn't have turned even worse from where they did. But probably the most devastating thing to me was telling my parents, and it still gets me a little emotional. It was devastating to me because I'd spoken to them previously about having gambling addictions. And then when I told them the trouble that I was in and spoke to them about how deep my gambling addiction was, they told me they still loved me, they were still proud of me, and they would still support me. And the reason that was devastating to me was it made me realize that 5 years earlier, I could have gone to them and told them all of the deep, dark secrets that I was too scared to divulge to people. And I really felt even worse. I felt like I'd let them down even further by not giving them the credit that they were going to be supportive of me no matter what had happened. And here I was at the worst part of whatever I'd done to break people's trust, and they were still standing there. They still are today, and telling me that they're proud of me and they work with me and help me. And so it was hard to take that knowing that I might have saved everybody all the heartache if I could have just given them the credit that they deserved. So they were all supportive. Relationships did fall away. Some friendships left. It was hard to stay friends, or I'm sure people in the police found it hard to stay friends with someone that was, a convicted criminal. Most of my family friends have been extremely supportive through the process. But I have lost some, and that is sad, but it's also something that I've learned to accept. I don't get to control that. I took the actions and made the mistakes that I did, and others have to make decisions for them that are in their safety and security. And, that's just the way it goes.
If you could go back, would you? I mean, I know you said you would tell your parents. Do you think telling them really would have changed things?
In reality, probably not. Because I had the discussions with them the couple of times I'd gone to therapy before, or gone to see a counsellor before. The biggest problem that I faced was lying to myself. So I could have had that conversation with my parents 5 years earlier, but without doing the work on myself, I would have eventually found another way to lie to them, or to get back into the hole again, or to to gloss over the deep how deep the issues were. I'd like to think it would have made a difference, but I think if I was being honest, the likelihood would be no.
How hard was it for you to dig yourself out of this hole? I mean, besides financially, your relationship implodes, while your parents are still standing there and supportive, this still had to be something that took a lot out of you.
Yeah, it was, as I said, it got to that moment at the end of 2017, sorry, that it was just enough. I just, I thought I'd had enough. I didn't think I had what it took to go through the process to change, the changes. And to be honest, I didn't know what I needed to do. I'd always been battling this gambling addiction and doing everything that the counselors and the psychologists had said in the past hadn't worked. I'd landed back where I always had. And in fact, I kept landing worse. I kept getting deeper and deeper every time I went back. So at the end of 2017, I didn't know I had the steel to get through any process, nor did I even know what that process was. But I suppose having that thought process of, considering killing yourself, considering going through, committing suicide, was a very big wake-up call. And at least for a period of time, 2-3 months, I just committed to doing everything that anybody asked me to do, psychiatrists, as in specialists. So I would always been against medication, but I spoke to the psychiatrist about it and said, do we need to go down that path? I started seeing a psychologist again. We have a group in Australia called Gambling Help. It's done through our Relationships Australia, and I went back and did one-on-one counselling. Thankfully, they had a group session that I really found value in. And for a long time, I was still gambling. I was going to these sessions and still gambling, but I just committed to at least do whatever I could for a period of time. I didn't really say 2 months, 3 months, but I just promised that when I said I was going to go to a meeting, I'd go to the meeting. And when I said I'd go to a psychiatrist or I'd take the pills, I'd take the pills. And eventually what started to happen, I think, this is, I probably almost by accident, I started to signal to myself the type of person I wanted to become. And that was a person who kept his promises, kept his word to himself. Even though I was still gambling for a long period of time, I was still going to, and the feelings were, I was starting to get sick of gambling. It wasn't doing what it had been doing before. And I've since read a bit of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and he talks about casting votes for the person that you want to become. And I do think by going to the doctor, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the one-on-one counselling, the group counselling, I was casting votes and I was signaling to myself the person I wanted to become. And eventually, 9 months later, I got to the point where I'd had enough. I went through what I call my come to Jesus moment, my brutal, honest moment where I broke down. I went where my nan and grandfather are buried, and I sat in front of their grave, and I just unleashed everything on myself, what I'd done wrong, who I'd hurt, how I'd hurt myself, all of my vulnerabilities. And almost in an instant, every pain I had gone away. My desire to gamble had left. I spoke for about 12 months thinking that it all happened in one day, but in retrospect, it was a 9-month process to figure it out. So, ultimately, I didn't know that process was going to take place. It was hard, it was long, I doubted it for a long time, especially when I was still gambling. But ultimately it was worth it, and it's now given me an ability to help other people go through it.
Well, and the one thing that you said, and this is something that I thought of earlier, is that you had to learn how to trust yourself, but you also had to learn how to forgive yourself. And I think that's a lesson that those two things are very hard for most of us, because we don't want to listen to the inner voice. We don't want to listen to our intuition that tells us you're going to be okay. We get wrapped up in the emotion of it.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some, some experts that will indicate that we do focus on the negatives of our past in order to not repeat them. But, also too, if you focus on them permanently, that's the only thought process that you can go through. And, I talk to people now about the line I like to use is, your past is an education, not a location. We need to learn from it, not live in it. And look, I think forgiveness is the word that a lot of people use. I don't know that I technically went down that path and have forgiven myself. I've got to a point where I no longer consider I need forgiving. I went through a process. I made some mistakes, but I also don't pat myself on the back for good things I did 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 10 years ago. So I'm not sure that I should beat myself up for bad things I did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and so forth. But the part about really starting to have some integrity with yourself, starting to trust yourself, it's probably what most of us consider forgiving ourselves, is that I'm now a man that I say I am. I'm no longer living through words. I do in most cases. I'm not perfect, but I do in most cases try and do what I say I'm going to do, and mostly for myself. It's I keep my word to myself is how I describe it, and often that'll come out in keeping my word to other people. But the problem isn't the lies you tell other people; it's the lies that you tell yourself, and so that's the process I had to learn, almost from scratch again.
Well, and the thing is, if you're keeping the promises to yourself, then you're managing your expectations. If you're not putting out that I expect somebody else to act this way, or I expect to do this for somebody and make them happy or please them, you're managing your expectations, and then you're not going to be let down.
That's exactly right. And we know, we all say it out loud that, external things don't make us happy, yet, 95% of the population still chase external things. The one thing I have learned in the last, 4 years is genuinely that external things don't make you happy. And the more able you are to own and consciously design your own identity, really does remove any external influence that comes across. There are certain things, we all need money to survive, of course. We need those, those basic safety needs. But when you are confident and comfortable with your own identity, when you have that self-confidence that you're going to keep your word to yourself, you no longer look externally for validation. But when you're uncertain about your own identity, the reason that we look for external validation is we're not certain about who we are. So anytime somebody says something, we wonder if that could be true. So we take it on. If somebody says that you're no good at work, well, that might be true. Should I take that on? I'm not good looking enough. So that might be true. Do I take that on? Once you start to get comfortable and keep the promises to yourself, and you are confident in your own identity, it really matters a lot less, if at all, what people say, especially people that aren't close to you or people that you value.
There was a gentleman, and he's actually from Australia. He was my third to last guest last season. And at 14, he started seeking out outside validation. At 12, he was confused about his purpose. At 14, he started seeking outside validation. And at 16, he wanted that perfect Facebook photo, and he got the perfect Facebook photo, but still the outside validation didn't fulfill him. And so he snuck out of his parents' house and took a flying leap off of a building. And he's paralyzed, and now he's a speaker. But once again, it's talking about that outside validation. He's like, I was looking outside of me and all these expectations of what people thought I should be like.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's very good reason why. We're socially conditioned to believe that external things are important to us. We're applauded for our marks at school. We're applauded when our room is tidied. We're applauded when we get a promotion at work. And all of these things all of these things are based around the end reward. We're rewarded when we win the last game of the season. You know, we're rewarded constantly for the way we look. You know, where you look good today. And so over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, all of these things have a subconscious imprint in our brain. And even though we consciously can have the discussion about external validation not being as valuable as finding your purpose and you know, internal measures, our deep subconscious still tells us, yeah, you say that, but we still want to look good in the Instagram photo. And the problem is, as your guest would have found out, that you take the photo and it actually doesn't bring you what you thought it did. And now you're even sadder because I've lived my whole life for this purpose. And now what am I? And that's where we do struggle. That's where a lot of, you know, men in particular, you know, can struggle with that. I work a lot with successful people. There's a lot of people that chase success in their business, and there's nothing wrong with chasing success in your business. But when that is your identity, when you have put your purpose around success in business, success in sport, success in something that's external, and you reach it, you do very quickly realize that you have a short period of euphoria followed by a very deep period of, well, is that all there is?
Yeah. And, you know, that song comes to mind, is that all there is, my friend? But, you know, the thing about it is with social media, especially now, I mean, they're even saying that there's documents from Facebook via Instagram that people actually feel worse looking at these Instagram pictures. And, you know, before our generation, we didn't necessarily have to compete on social media. We had the magazines that would tell us how we should look. We'd have all the, you know, the parents telling us you need to do better in school, you need to do this. But now it's that much hyped up more because now you have all these social media platforms that you're competing with an algorithm that can mess with your head, especially if you're a younger person. Because one day, oh, they love me so much. The next day, oh, look, I got one like. They buried my feed. What? You know, how do you...
I mean, you know, I suppose back, you know, I'm 44. When I was younger, it was people in magazines or on TV, which you kind of thought were, you know, they were celebrities or somebody. But nowadays, it's your next door neighbor. It's everybody. And when everybody is only putting up their world's best photo, and you don't have that, and you know, I mean, to be honest, even some of the photos that go up about, you know, normal life and natural life, and you know, this is me being comfortable with myself with no makeup on, even they're fake, you know, and you know, those people aren't happy with how they look without makeup on. They're just trying to tell people that they're happy without makeup on. And you know, it's a dangerous world. There's a lot of benefits to social media, of course, but you know, again, I do believe that a lot of those issues can be solved if people are able to go away and do some work on their own self-confidence, their own resilience. Because when you own who you are, truly own who you are, not, you know, and I talk to people about this with my gambling addiction. I said for a long time I had a gambling addiction. It was true, but I didn't believe it. And there's a lot of people that say they're comfortable with who they are, and they're not. And you know, if we do the work, even in schools, on resilience and identity and purpose, all of a sudden, somebody else having a Lamborghini doesn't make much of a difference to me because that's not my purpose. It's a nice photo, but that's all it is.
Well, I think what we miss at teaching, you know, teaching kids is mindfulness, is meditation, is the things to get them out of stress and to help calm them and make sure that they're not seeing the outside influence. You touched on something about identity, and whether somebody is super successful with identity. I went through my own journey because I started out as a mail file clerk, and I worked my way up through different companies to become a claims supervisor, a claims unit supervisor. I wasn't a whole claims department supervisor, but I was a claims unit supervisor. And when I walked away from that job, I had this really tough issue of, who am I now? And I'm doing the same thing now because my husband, Pat, and I'm not bringing this up, but he passed. And because he passed, I had so many years of being his wife, being his partner. And today I came to the realization that at a certain point, because of his health issues, I spent my life living in fear of when something was going to happen. And it's like, looking back now, it's like, how do you, it's been a year and 3 months. How do I step back and go, okay, you don't have to live in fear anymore.
Mm.
And, whether it be fear or your identity, these are things that we just fall into, and we don't know how to separate it. It took me a while after I left the insurance job to realize, okay, I'm not this claim supervisor. I don't need to be supervising everybody. I don't need to do this. And I think it's the same as if the person that's achieving success. It's the same thing. Your identity, like the empty nester, your kids are gone.
Yep.
Or the person that retires. I mean, there's so many ways, but we never look at it. We always look at it as this big different thing, but they're all really similar.
So look, I think every issue you've described there is exactly the same. And I work with a lot of athletes in particular that transition out of being a successful athlete into the real world or into the world. And primarily, what you do isn't who you are, right? But when you are something for so long, I had the same issue when I left the police. I didn't have the choice in leaving the police, but I had this. I was 18 years as a police officer, because when you introduce yourself to somebody, hi, what's your name? What do you do? They are intrinsically linked. Who you are and what you do seem to be intrinsically linked, except they are not. Who you are is never what you do. I'm sorry for your husband's passing. It's the same scenario of people that go through divorce. If you've been married for 20 years and you are unhappy with your marriage, it's sometimes easier to the subconscious to be unhappy in marriage than to confront the fact that I'm no longer married. My identity is actually attached to being a married couple. Mm-hmm. My identity is attached to being a claims supervisor. My identity is attached to being a professional sports person. And when that ends, if you haven't done any work on what your actual identity is, then all of a sudden you are left with nothing, with a whole, who am I? That's the question right. that comes up primarily. If I am not this, then who am I? Now, that's a very good question to ask, but not very many people take the next step to actually try and find out. They just say, well, who am I? And then they think that if they wander the desert for, 40 days and 40 nights, that something will miraculously appear and tell them who they are. It's not a journey that gets found out without some work and, to be honest, some pain, because to formulate a true identity of oneself, you also have to release and relinquish some former version of who you thought you were. And often that's the biggest problem that people can confront, is their subconscious doesn't want them to admit that what they had in the past might not have been who they were. And so it doesn't allow you to even consider who you might be now.
Well, I mean, for me, and this is just my podcast, but for me, I mean, before I met my husband, it was just like, I was a strong, independent woman. Not that I wasn't independent. I mean, the interesting thing is, after talking to a friend today, it's like, I realized that because he had been sick, I was doing everything anyway. There was only a few things he did around the house, which I was thankful for, and I'm glad he did. But it was like, you were still in charge. You weren't necessarily an equal couple. You thought you were, because your mind wanted you to believe that. And then, in a case of divorce, it's leading up. And even, it's leading up, because I went through divorce. Okay, this isn't working. I got to get out. I got to get out. Your voice starts telling you that. And if you're listening, you get out. But with this, it was kind of like, even though I was told September of 2019 that he was on borrowed time, even though my mind knew and I was working through it, and then we got the pandemic. So it was like, I was even more cautious. When it happened, I picked him up. He seemed fine. And 5 minutes later, he's dead in the car. And there's your biggest fear come to reality, and how to unpack that quickly. I mean, they got him back, but that's neither here nor there. He ended up passing. I ended up having to take him off life support, but it still happens so quickly that it's just like your reality is completely changed in a matter of that. It's like when you got found out. It's the same thing. It's like, okay, now what?
So I do a talk to businesses actually, and I use the world's greatest philosopher Mike Tyson as the basis for my story, and it's a quote that's attributed to him that says, "We all have a plan until we get punched in the face."
Yeah.
And in your case, but in the case that I talk to businesses about, and this was evident in my own scenario, my own workforce. We had plans and procedures for people that had mental health issues. Our workplaces and our bosses genuinely wanted to do the right thing for people that had mental health issues in the workplace and treat them like any other injury, illness, except wanting to do that without having to confront it is completely different the moment it arrives on your doorstep.
Yeah.
We lost our son recently, and
I'm sorry.
You could thank you. He had a long battle himself with a genetic disorder, and you can prepare as much as you want for that moment, but you can never know how you would never truly know how that moment will impact you until the moment happens. There are circumstances in people's lives that say, if my son come home and said this, then I would be that. But you don't know. You just want to believe that is actually the case, and that comes down to, that comes back to the identity as well. That until you're actually confronted, I was confronted in my journey. I didn't have to confront my depression and my addiction. I should have, but until I got called into the Deputy Commissioner's office, nobody had ever called me to account on it. So I would like to think that when something happened, I would do X, but I never did, and I never had to confront my own identity until that moment. Until I got punched in the face, and it's happened regularly over periods of time. But it's right to prepare, and it's right to consider, but we also have to accept that once something has happened, we also have a new position on it. We don't have to get down on ourselves because we didn't act the way that we thought we would have. We just get to make the next right decision. We don't have to make the same wrong decision over and over and over again. We can wake up tomorrow and make a new right decision. And this is who I'm going to be, or this is who I'm going to start to work towards. You don't wake up tomorrow and with a new identity. You work towards it. It's a daily chore, to be who you are.
Right. I mean, it took me a lot to admit today, like I said, that, when he passed, my medical doctor's like, do you realize, because she was his doctor as well, she's like, do you realize the anxiety you were under? No, I don't know what you're talking about. But now, now being able to step back, and I mean, I've had a therapist this whole time. I had a therapist before he passed. Now being able to step back and actually look at it for what it is, it's still dictating my life. The anxiety is still there because the fear is still there. And it's like, dare I say, it's the Jetson thing, Jane, stop this crazy thing. How do you stop the roller coaster of, you have to consciously step back and start making those choices. Like you were saying, you have to reinvent yourself, and you have to step back and say, okay, I don't have to live my life that way anymore.
Yeah. And look, you have to stop the roller coaster slowly. Mm-hmm. And I learned this through my experience of the 9 months of going to the psychiatrist, psychologist, to gambling help, and still gambling. In hindsight, as I look back on that, I had to take that path because stopping cold turkey had never really worked. I had to do the work. I had to build the foundation of what was to come. I couldn't just, if I stopped on day one, on day two, I had nothing to go to. So all I was doing every day was just battling this old identity of a gambler. Don't gamble today, don't gamble today, don't gamble today. But ever so slowly, I started to build a new identity. And there is a logical pathway to building that identity and building somebody that can trust themselves, or building someone that can respect themselves. But it doesn't start by waking up and saying, I respect myself, or I'm a strong, independent person, or I'm a, that's part of a mantra maybe, but it only comes with work. Almost every client I work with, the very first thing I ask them to do is stop hitting snooze for a week. That's it. Don't hit snooze for a week. Just change one little thing. And, it doesn't take that long. It takes 4 weeks, 6 weeks, maybe 12 weeks. And people can reshape their entire identity around becoming somebody that keeps promises to themselves, which is primarily what self-confidence is and identity is. It's keeping promises to yourself. We break far too many promises to ourselves because they don't mean anything to us. And that's what ends up letting us down in the long run.
Well, we're taught at a young age that, your stuff doesn't matter. You need to please me. You're not supposed to be pleasing yourself. There's a perfect analogy for what you described, because back to claims, I worked elevator escalator claims. And everybody's like, well, if you hit that stop button on an escalator, it's going to stop. No, it's not. It's going to slowly come to a stop, because otherwise, if you jam that button, people are going to fly off. So it's going to slowly stop. Right. Yeah. So that's the perfect analogy for that, because if you hit that stop button on the escalator, everybody's going to go off and get hurt worse. So if you're slowly,
we talk about social conditioning. How many times have people decided to start Monday, do New Year's resolutions? When I turn 30, when I turn 40, when I turn 50, after Christmas, whatever, we are forever trying to create a big moment at a specific point in time. And we continue to fail at it because we never have the confidence that we can actually keep that promise. We never build the foundation. We try and, even if we're going to start on January 1, we typically destroy ourselves on December 31 just to get our last meal in, or as many cigarettes as we can smoke, or as many drinks as we can have. And then we somehow wake up the next day and think that the whole world is going to change. Whereas if you actually started on December 1, building a very small, but consistent process, come January 1, you're probably going to be in a very good place to do whatever it is that you say you're going to do.
And that's a prime example, because it goes back to conditioning, because we are conditioned that, okay, well, guess what? Gym memberships and weight loss programs are all going to be on sale in January, so I can make my New Year's resolution happen.
Yeah, that's true. And look, to be fair, I own a small gym. We don't get many more people in January, but there is a perception that people will make deals in January, because people do make those decisions around Christmas time, because they want to get in shape, and we know it's a date. But Strava have done some data on this, that something like the 17th of January is the day that most people will give up their New Year's resolution, and 92% of people's New Year's resolution doesn't see February. So only 8% of people even get to February, even get a month through their resolution. And again, I said it, but that's because they never put the work in beforehand. They've got no trust in their ability to keep a promise, because the last time they gave up smoking, they failed. The last time they decided to lose weight, they failed. The last time, even when they said they were going to work out for a week, they got to Wednesday and patted themselves on the back and said, I'll get back to it next Monday. And all of those things, dent away at your identity. They dent away at your self-confidence. And we try and make a big grand gesture in the hope that the embarrassment factor will pull us through. But we can always find some sort of genuine reason why we couldn't see February out, and it really comes back to doing the work when nobody's watching, and small stuff, not hitting snooze, drinking. I drink 500 mils of water when I wake up. I just have a morning routine. There's a reason why the most successful people in the world have morning routines, right? If you haven't started to build one, what chance are you of being successful in your own life when that seems to be the cornerstone of a lot of people's success? The things they do in their routine are kind of irrelevant, but actually keeping the promise to yourself to have a routine is probably the most important part of it, not the things that you do.
This goes back to what you were saying about keeping a promise. My father-in-law has passed a a while ago, but he said he was, I don't know how old he was, but he told John, my husband, he's like, I'm going to quit smoking. And if I choose to pick up smoking again, I'm going to use this. I'm going to have to start with the pack that I did not finish. Okay. So I think this was like 20 years later, he has passed, and we're cleaning out his house. And there in a drawer is that pack of cigarettes. He did not preserve it at all. So you can imagine how nasty that would have been. But he kept his promise to himself.
Oh, good man. Yeah, look, and often that, you know, some of the big grand gestures are big enough for some people, and sometimes they just get to the right point in their life where they decide, you know, that now's the time, and it does work. It does take. But certainly a lot of the people I work with, that if you don't build a foundation, it is very difficult to maintain. Not difficult to start, and maybe not difficult to get a bit way through, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6. But eventually, if you haven't built a foundation of, you know, that you can build on top of, then you're probably going to fail at some way, somewhere down the line.
Let's since you're talking about little moments and stuff, do you think that if instead of having the big grand gesture, if we actually took each day as a little moment of, look, I made it through the day, I lived, and you know, you mentioned gratitude in your topics that we talked about. Do you think gratitude plays a lot in the success of your life now?
Certainly does in my life. And again, a lot of the people that I've studied and researched, they all point to it. I mean, one of the processes I used was, you know, was a Tony Robbins analogy: find what somebody else is doing well, and, you know, copy that. And you know, I tried to find, you know, 10 people that I thought were doing things well, and tried to find the commonalities across them, people that resonated with me, not just random successful people. And gratitude is certainly one of those things. And you know, there's some things that inherently were difficult for me to start, mostly socially conditioned, being an alpha male, a football player, a police officer. You know, we don't do meditation, we don't do yoga, we don't do gratitude. You know, we just, you know, get on with the day and see how it goes. And, you know, to be honest, that got me into a bit of strife. It got me a lot of success, but it also got me into a little bit of strife. And so I started to consider doing things that were naturally not a fit for me. And gratitude was one of those. And I have to say that without a shadow of a doubt, one of the greatest tools I ever used was learning how to be grateful for the things I had in my life, but also learning how to be grateful for the shit that was in my life. Sorry for
no, it's fine.
Swearing on
that's fine.
Grateful for the shit that was in my life, because, and again, back to that point of forgiving yourself, learning to be grateful for something that you've done wrong in the past, or something that hasn't gone completely right, allows you to find the lessons a lot easier from it. You know, do I wish I could have gone through it a different way and ended up in the same place? Yes. But that wasn't that doesn't seem to be an option for my story. So I am grateful that I went through it. Doesn't mean I'm glad I went through it. Doesn't mean I'm happy about who I hurt and what money I lost and all of that sort of stuff. But my wife says, you know, you can be simultaneously happy or grateful, and also there'll be some negative to the story. You know, just because there are some negatives to the story doesn't mean there are no positives. And just because there are positives to the story doesn't mean there are no negatives. But where we, the Stoic philosophy that I follow, where we focus our attention, that, you know, I can choose today whether or not I focus on the positive or I focus on the negative of the outcome. And, you know, use COVID as an example. We do have a small gym, and we closed down for 3 months last year, and, you know, we lost our income for 3 months, and that's the negative part of it. But I hadn't had a holiday for 4 years. Now, we decided to focus on what can we do with the time that we have been blessed with, and we would call it that. You know, we were blessed with some time to actually work on our purpose, our identity, our, you know, time together, time as a family. And we had a sick son, and, you know, or we could have sat at home and complained that we had no money, you know, and focused on that, and we would have missed out on all of these opportunities. So I did learn through gratitude that you can find positive things in negative spaces, and they do help you move forward, and they do help you succeed, and they help you find purpose and gratitude, I suppose, in everything that we have. We all have something to be grateful for, even in terrible situations that that I've experienced and you've described of your own life. There are some great things to be grateful for in those experiences, and if we can be able to learn, and it's a learned trait. Gratitude's another learned skill. It's not something you wake up and you have. If you can find ways to be grateful for that shit and grateful for some of the parts of the negativity, I think life becomes a lot more pleasant to live.
Do you think that there is a lot of pressure to be an alpha male?
Yes, I do. I think, it's probably weirdly, there's even a little more in today's society where it seems okay to not be an alpha male publicly. It's probably more so a confusion for a lot of males, to be an alpha male. Sometimes, in some ways, if you're an alpha male, you're told that you're not sensitive enough, and therefore you're nasty to people and you should be cancelled. But if you're not really as soft and sensitive as people tell you should be, you just don't know where to land. I think it's more a confusion. Alpha male is probably no longer the correct term to be using, but people don't no longer seem to be able to find the identity that suits them. They still try to fit into a mold that society is going to tell them they should be in. I don't think there's anything wrong with people being themselves. I think the danger is people lie to themselves about who they truly are, and then they fall into dangers of making silly mistakes. Look, the world needs alpha people. There's no two ways about it. The world needs people that will take on those roles. The world needs every type of person as well. So it's tough. I wouldn't want to be a young police officer. I don't even know if I'd want to be a young footballer. Someone that's told, you look at even NFL football, Australian football down here. You are paid big money and lauded for being extremely aggressive, but the minute you walk off the field, you're expected to be extremely, humble or extremely polite and sensitive, and not be, it's not something I think it turns on and off. So it's a difficult place to be. I don't know that I ever really considered myself alpha. I use that term now because it's probably true. I enjoy being good at my job. Being a strong male, I suppose. Being a problem solver. Being someone who would step up. I think it's difficult for guys and girls these days to just be themselves, but actually really be themselves, not be themselves based on what the psychologist or the university tells you that is acceptable.
Well, what's interesting is not even that, though. I mean, because it's not just that telling you this is who you're supposed to be. I was in a chat with somebody one day, and they were talking about how boys at the age of 8 are looking at porn now, and people complain that, well, women get this whole idea from Disney about Disney princesses. But the truth of the matter is, I write books, and my book, I got told I didn't describe certain things enough, meaning certain parts of male anatomy. Sorry to be a little blunt, but I got told, they want something that is above average. We'll just say that. And the fact is, they want an alpha male, but yet they don't want an alpha male in real life. They want somebody that's emotionally supportive there for you. So when a woman is reading this, how, you're sitting there, you want the guy to rip your clothes off, sorry to be blunt, but then you don't want, in reality, you would sit there and scream, that's a possible rape. So
it's confusing, right?
Yeah.
And look, I think one of the dramas that, and this is not my area of expertise, this is probably just a comment I have as a guy who's relatively opinionated, and to be fair, I'm probably old school. I don't really buy into a lot of the new world thinking, and I primarily don't buy into it because it doesn't bother me. I don't care what you call me, who you call me. Even before we went on here and you asked how you pronounce my name, I just don't care. I'll be honest with you. The reason I don't care is because I know exactly who I am. So what you decide to call me is irrelevant to me. Whether that's my name, whether that's my title, whether that's my job description, it's irrelevant to me. And I do think, again, back to the identity thing, that because people don't do the work on their own identity, they are so focused on what they are called, how they are referenced, how people reference other people. More people seem to be interested in how somebody is referencing other people or speaking about other people or politics or what to do with a mask or not to do with a mask. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. There are some issues that I will stand on, I stand up for. And sometimes I think we try and find bigger issues external to ourselves to give us a reason not to actually do the difficult work of figuring out who we are. It's a lot easier for me to blame the world for climate change, for COVID, for the gender pronouns, for all of those sorts of things, than it is to actually figure out who I am. Because if I've got to figure out who I am, all of a sudden something might be my fault and not society's fault, the government's fault, my ex's fault. If you figure out who you are, you've got to start to take responsibility for yourself, and primarily pointing the finger externally removes personal responsibility. And that's when I had depression, I say this about depression was a very safe place for me, because whenever I had a major depressive disorder, I had an excuse to not be successful. Now I could always fall back and go, well, it's because I've got depression, I can't do X, Y, and Z, because I've got a gambling addiction. But if I actually took ownership and responsibility of my depression and ownership and responsibility of my gambling addiction, wherever I was in life was now my fault. It was on basis of my decisions and my actions. And there are clinical diagnoses of depression. I have one. There are clinical diagnosis of addiction, and I have one. But ultimately, the clinical diagnosis isn't going to change who I am. I have to be responsible for changing who I am. And again, looking external for all of the other people to be responsible, other things. I didn't get the job because my boss is sleeping with somebody else and he plays golf with her. That just removes personal responsibility, and that's an easy place to be for people. And I think that's where a lot of this comes from.
Well, and like right now, I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's not that I am not knowing what's going on in the world, because I do, but I quit watching the nightly news. I quit watching the nightly news before my husband died, and I've watched it one time since, and that was when they attacked the Capitol. Other than that, I'll check here and there for a news story or whatever if it comes up in the headlines, because all that does, watching the news, is get my anxiety up. It's things I cannot control and I cannot work on, but it's something that everybody decides to focus on. And this can be very divisive at times. And like you said, I can sit there and focus on that stuff, that I blame it on this, blame it on that, and not take responsibility for my own actions. The very first claim I ever had on my desk was a parking lot accident. And a guy had snow in his back window and he backed into somebody. And my guy was the one that was parked. And he is arguing with me that he is not at fault for the accident. And I'm like, how do you figure? Did you clean your back window? No, he should have seen me. And that moment in that claim made me realize that most people do not want to take responsibility for their actions. So
no, there's an analogy of how many people get pulled over for speeding and blame the police officer.
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, people don't want to. It's hard to take responsibility. I mean, but again, something that I do say is that whilst it's hard to accept that every decision, up until when I got in trouble, I wasn't prepared to make that admission that every decision and action that I'd taken had actually led me to that point. And people would say things like, you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you're on call all the time. I was going through a divorce, I had a new family, all of these external factors. and somebody should have recognized and somebody should have asked. But at a particular point in time, I decided to join the federal police. At a particular point in time, I decided to take the roles that I took. I didn't have to. I wanted the jobs, but I didn't have to work 60 or 70 hours a week. I could have made a decision to go and, to do a different job that was Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I could have made different decisions in relationships. I could have stayed with people longer, left people earlier. All of those decisions were in my power. So at some stage, I realized that where I was in life was a culmination of every decision and action that I had taken. Irrespective of what other people's responsibility might have been, they're responsible for that, not me. But the beauty of coming to that conclusion is that where I get to in the next 6 weeks, the next 6 months, the next 6 years, is also as a result of my decisions and actions. Except now I actually know that, and I can plan what those actions are going to be so that I am where I want to be in 6 weeks, 6 months, and 6 years. If you blame somebody else, no matter how much it looks like it's their fault, whenever you blame somebody else, you can't do anything about it but be miserable. The only way to move forward is to find a way to take responsibility, to make it your fault, even if it seems like there's no way you can make it your fault. If I'm walking on the sidewalk and I get hit by a car, that was my fault because I made a decision at some stage to walk on that footpath. I could have walked on the other one. I could have drove myself. Yes, the driver has a responsibility. There's no doubt about that. But I can't change his responsibility. I can't change his actions. I can't control what he does. I can only control what I do. And now that I know that, I know where I'm going to end up in 6 weeks and 6 months and 6 years. And before, when I was looking external, you got no clue. You're just flying in the wind.
So you said you started now, were you counseling people before you got caught, or were you just in therapy at that point?
Yeah, I was just in therapy. Look, I was probably counseling people, but certainly not professionally nor formally. No, so I was going to see therapists at that time. And look, it's, as I said, my background is in health science. I've got a health science degree, and when I had no other options left at the police, I opened a small fitness studio in Brisbane. And what I was finding was my own experience with mental health issues, with depression, with the gambling addiction, were very much benefiting the people that were coming to see me. And I would describe some of my experiences to them, and then they would open up about their more, the deeper mental health issues, not just they were there for health and fitness. And I was already interested in neuroscience and the brain and how our brains work with habits and routines. And, so I just continued that learning and basically transitioned what was a physical health and fitness business to probably what was then a hybrid. So I would do a little bit of both. And now primarily, we still have the gym, but primarily my focus now is on mental health coaching. I call it mental strength and conditioning training with individuals and companies as well. I mean, all the problems that individuals have, businesses have, and teams have, all centered around identity and purpose and not wanting to be brutally honest with their failings and all of those sorts of things. So that's primarily what I do now for people that are in my sort of circumstances, typically. So they are successful. They've chased everything that the world told them that they, should have to be successful and happy. And they're starting to realize that that's not them. They're not happy. They're making risky decisions with money. They're considering or have already started cheating on their partners. They're buying sports cars. They're trying to find the next thing that's going to make them happy. And they're realizing it's not. And all of a sudden their life's starting to unravel. I'm trying to work with people before their life unravels. But I do also work with people afterwards. But, trying to save them, they don't have to leave their jobs. But if you realign what your purpose is, all of a sudden that job feels a lot better than what it did, 5 months ago.
It's interesting because the last two guests I had on this season one was an actress and one was a musician, and both of them, we discussed the fact that what does success look like? And, the fear of success, well, there's the fear of failure, there's the fear of success, because so I've achieved this, now what? And you're dealing with people that have gone through that. So, it's amazing how we can, I guess Britney Spears is a good case study, because she had that pinnacle of success. Everybody kind of ignores that. It's like we're all talking about the Free Britney moment. We're not talking about the moment that everybody had turned and attacked her. No. And how else was she not going to implode? I mean, everybody was trying to take a piece of her.
Yeah.
So where was she to go? She didn't have that stability.
Yeah, it's and look, everybody that was trying to take a piece of her was doing that because they weren't comfortable with who they are. I mean, people that are comfortable with who they are don't really care how successful somebody else is. In fact, they use it as motivation, not a tool for bringing people down. But you're entirely right. We have very short memories. There's a lot of these cycles that go through and around of people attacking celebrities, or people that are put up there, and even some years later, people have made mistakes in their life. Some people have made things that probably weren't mistakes at the time, but with 2021 morals have become mistakes. And the world wants to pile on. But again, it's people wanting to pile on because if I can get in part with the group that's piling on, I'll feel okay about myself, instead of actually doing the work to really feel okay about yourself.
Right. Like consent is a big thing now coming up in romance novels. I write about in the 80s. We didn't have, in the 80s, if somebody was going to kiss you, they were going to kiss you. It wasn't, oh, wait, can I, there was none of that. And I mean,
no, and look, if people were being honest with themselves, like I have a relationship, I don't want that in my relationship. I don't want to ask to kiss my partner when that does remove some things from the relationship. I think we in a lot of cases in society these days, we risk losing everything because we're trying to fight the wrong battle in the wrong way. Consent absolutely should be a right that is fought for 100%.
Yes.
In the right context.
Yes.
And the same for gender identity, and the same for climate change, and the same for COVID and masks. They are genuine issues to be fought for in the right context. That doesn't mean in every context.
Right.
And we have to accept that there are multiple contexts, just like there's multiple personalities. And often it's the hypocrisy of we all want something one way, but then we want everybody to focus on everything being this one way for, let's say, for consent. And again, this is not my area of expertise, and I'm not advocating one way or the other.
Right.
But it has to be all one way for consent. But gender identity is fluid. I don't understand how we can have 50 different things on this occasion, but there's no context over here. We have to have, we have to accept that there's 8 billion people in the world. There are going to be different ways for different people, and different ways for people to understand, like your first insurance claim. That guy genuinely saw the activity as not his fault, right? And we even in policing, we know this. You will get eyewitnesses see exactly the same thing and have different accounts based on their own experiences. Mm-hmm. I think it would be helpful for us to at least accept that we all have our own experiences when we have the conversation. And merely having the conversation doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're open to newer and better ideas, or learning. I was in a conversation the other day where I put my point of view forward. The other person didn't agree. And I was grateful that I put my point of view forward, because he actually taught me something that I had never considered before, even though my point of view might have been shocking to him, or, we were able to have a conversation. I worry that we're not able to have a conversation anymore, because if we have the conversation, all of a sudden we have to be labeled one side or the other, not just somebody who wants to learn more.
And then we're going to cancel you. And I mean, what's happening now is we have this all or nothing. It's either all this way or it's nothing. And where's the commonality or middle ground? I'm not saying consent, we'll just use consent as a thing. Consent is a major thing. And yes, it should be had. But in the same token, we'll go back to the woman that's reading the romance novel. If you want the guy to be coming in and ripping your clothes off that you're dating, are you going to be in that moment when he says, oh, by the way? I mean,
Yeah.
So you have to figure out, and I even saw consent where this woman was trying to kiss a baby, and this girl came on, it was a TikTok, and she's like, this is about consent. Never force a kid to be, and it was a toddler. And my only concern with that is, if you're saying that the kid should not, if the kid does not want to be touched, it should not be touched. And I agree to a certain level. But then are you desensitizing kids to being part of the human compassion and touching, touching their hand or whatever? Are you losing some kind of human connection there?
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of the magic in every aspect of life happens somewhere closer to the middle. It doesn't happen on the extremes, except social media, probably more so than mainstream media, and society today tends to lend itself to the more extreme getting the most voice, or even the loudest voice at least. But still, I'd like to hope that, majority of people are somewhere in the middle, maybe a little either side of the middle. It's okay to be either left or right, or up or down, or whichever side that you want to be on. But I do think that most of the magic happens somewhere closer to the middle, where we can, even start to accept that there are things that should change in our world. There is no doubt about that. But an all or nothing mentality puts everybody offside. A mentality where we work towards a common goal at some stage in the future is far more beneficial than saying, if you don't do it all my way right now, then you're completely against anything, whatever those topics are. Whether it's, I say, I watch a few things from the US, and whether it's racism, we all are against racism, and we're all against the non-consent. But you also can't wake up tomorrow and have it all disappear.
Right.
And so we have to, we went through this in the police, where, policing is a very male-dominated industry. And we would like to have represented the community better than what we did. But we also, in 2015, we were representative of the community far better than we were in 1995, because we did some, things along the way. And I think we need to recognize the good that we've done over periods of time, at the same time as acknowledging we have a way to go. And also that there is a path to get there, not a, it's not a complete strategy that happens overnight. And probably an analogy I'll use that it makes sense to me. I'm not even sure if it's true, but it makes sense to me that the airbags in cars had been invented somewhere early in the 50s or the 40s or the 60s or something. But the way that people enjoyed their steering wheel meant that the airbag wouldn't fit in the steering wheel. So gradually what car manufacturers did, again, I don't know if this is true, but it makes sense to me, is that they made the sports steering wheel, and they put like a three-way shape on it. So they were creating a little bit more space in the middle, but it was sports, so people wanted it. And then 10 years later, they came out with the leather padded steering wheel, which was premium. So, now it's bigger. And because in the old days, it was just hard wood, and it had two lines across it, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it was leather. Now, all of a sudden, it had a nice cushion in the middle that, this is premium. So everyone wanted one. And then gradually, they just slid the airbag inside. And now airbags are in, every car, almost around the world. It's a 50-year process. If they had have just put airbags in the car in the 1960s, we might have been safer, but nobody would have bought car. They wouldn't have bought that car. They would have all gone and bought the car that didn't have it, because it was too big a change too quick. And, again, this probably ties in nicely to my own story and individuals. Too big a change too quick is very unlikely to take, because it's so drastically against what identity you currently have for yourself, whether that identity is right or wrong. It's so far against that identity that it just can't stick. But if you gradually build it over time, in 6 months' time, you look back and you realize you're a different person than you were, but it feels natural to you,
Yeah. And I mean, what you're talking about with the car, every time something like this happens, as far as, the gender identity and everything, advertisers jump in on this. And then, and this is where it gets a little hinky, because you're looking at, we'll say, gay pride. And I am all, I am an advocate. I think everybody should love who they want to love. I don't have a problem with that. My issue is, now we're gonna just market the hell out of it, and we're selling you merchandise. Why are we merchandising a lifestyle? Why are we
a moral issue?
Yeah. It's like,
which plays into the next moral issue, that you see reward for strong advocation of a moral issue, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. And the TikToks that get shown, and the ones that make the news, or the ones that make the Jimmy Fallon show or whatever, are always the most extreme ones. So it rewards the behavior. It rewards the next person to do the next most extreme thing. And then all of a sudden the group think is that that's how we have to be in order to get out. We haven't done our work on our identity. I need my external validation. I get that by however many views I get. So I might not even genuinely believe this topic, but I know it's going to get me views, so I'm going to say it anyway. Yeah. And then more people follow on, and then you get radical people that make silly decisions, and we end up in a lot of trouble. Again, if we can, it might be vanilla, but if we can focus more on the middle, and look, 95% of people are actually somewhere in the middle. We know from bell curves, most of the people are going to fit in the middle somewhere. And that's where all the magic happens, when people that are, not necessarily aligned, but can at least understand that somebody else has a different point of view and wants to learn from that point of view. That's when good decisions can be made.
One thing I will add about, extreme behavior. Back in 1995, there was a movie called Natural Born Killers. I don't know if you've ever, are you familiar with it?
I haven't seen it, but I know the movie. Yeah.
I went on a date. Don't ask me. Both of us wanted to leave the movie. Okay. The movie is very graphic, but it's about a couple who basically go on a murder rampage, and they start getting more media attention. And they kidnap like a talk show host. And I mean, it just gets extreme and more extreme. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, at the time, I remember the guy was saying, he's like, well, what did you think? And I'm like, I wanted to leave. He goes, why? I said, because I feel like that could happen one day. And here we are with all the social media and everything. And it's like, yeah, it really could. It really could. So
yeah, it's I mean, it is happening. It's not happening. Well, it probably does happen with notoriety and that, but there's a lot of systems in the world that are actually the same. All you need to do is import somebody else's name, import the different system or the different strategy. You could replace my story with a different job, a different addiction type, and it's a very similar story across the world. The amount of things that are the same in this world are far more than the things that are different in this world. And it just depends on how close to the issue you want to look. If you want to look at it at a very micro level, you'll see differences everywhere. But the bird's eye view of most things is that we're kind of very similar in our thoughts and our systems, but we're getting too far down in the weeds to, so we can identify every single issue that we have.
So you are now on a council, correct? For mental health?
I'm now an ambassador for the Australia-New Zealand Mental Health Association. So it's a non-profit organisation in Australia and New Zealand that host and run conferences on all different styles of mental health. There's an addiction conference, there's a frontline workers mental health conference, there's a workplace mental health, domestic violence, Indigenous mental health, youth mental health. So they run all these conferences, bring world experts together to talk on a range of mental health issues and try and evoke change in policy and in thinking. And earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to be recognised as an ambassador for that association, which was, it's a very proud moment for me, because, when you make mistakes like I do, sometimes you don't think people will give you a second chance. And To me, it was a proud moment for the effort that I put in over the 4 years earlier, to that point. So, yeah, it's quite a different thing for me to undertake, but it's enjoyable.
Congratulations on that. What is
Yeah,
your book? Tell me about your book.
Yeah, my book's called Externally Bulletproof, Internally Brittle. And it's the tagline is how to turn your struggle into your success. And it primarily comes in 2 parts. And again, if excuse my language, but it's the opening line of my book. When I got in trouble, when I got caught, I had 2 questions in my head. The first one was, how the fuck did I get here? And the second one was, how the fuck do I get out? And, primarily that's the 2 questions that we often ask ourselves when we're in trouble. And the first part of my book describes how I got there. It describes some part of my policing journey. It describes my depression. It describes what it feels like to be in the midst of those depressive moments. Describes the gambling and how I fell off and how deep I got into it. It describes some of the influences that got me to that point, some of the social conditioning. But then that's a part that's more the story part, I suppose, and that's a part that a lot of people probably resonate with. And then the second half is actually largely my coaching process, the pathway that I took and subsequently discovered to move past any struggle and use it to to fuel your success, to build your own identity, to build your own purpose, to build your own fulfillment. And so the back half of the book is probably a little bit more self-help, instructional. It's a step-by-step process you can follow. And so I was very excited I say it took me 4 years to write it in 4 months. I've been jotting stuff down for 4 years, and probably the last 4 or 5 months I actually wrote it and released it. By the time this comes out, it probably would have been released 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So it's only been released for a short time. So,
well, congratulations. Is it on Amazon or?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon.
Worldwide or just in Australia?
Worldwide. No, worldwide. I have some clients in the US. I have some in the UK as well. So, but it's a story that resonates across, across a lot of designations and a lot of people. And I certainly, whether it sells across the world, I don't know, but it's done okay in Australia. I was very grateful. Talking of gratitude. One of the people I certainly followed to help me through my process was Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's a neuroscientist. And there was a time last week after I released my book that in the compulsive behavior category, my book was #1 and Dr. Joe's was #2.
Nice.
And so I did take a screenshot of that. Look, it didn't last, but I got the screenshot, and hopefully one day I'll get to show it to Dr. Joe himself. But yeah, it's a nice thing to have come out. It's a scary thing because, there's I could have just ridden off into the sunset. I've been through my own drama. I didn't have to put myself back out there again, open myself up for ridicule. There's a lot of people that don't know my story that will now know it. But I do say in the book that, I had to make sure that my pain wasn't worthless, that I went through it for a reason. And that reason was, who I am today and what I do today. And part of that is putting the story out there so that others like me that didn't have a voice that resonated with them might actually have a voice that resonates.
One last question, and I promise this is the last question. Do you deal with them? Have you dealt with imposter syndrome? I mean, I'm sure with your clients, that is a possibility, but have you personally ever dealt with it?
Yeah, look, I think I do deal with it because the process that I followed to get out of my dramas originally was following people like Tony Robbins, Dr. Joe Dispenza, other great people, Ed Milet, that I follow and still follow and still love the stuff that they do. And even the people that are in my space of coaching, there was a long time, and probably the reason it took me such a long time to put my book out there is that I had to accept that I do have a story to tell, because I'm not an author. That's a story. That's what I was telling myself. I'm not Tony Robbins. I'm not Joe Dispenza. I'm not Ed Milet. Who on earth is going to buy my book? What's the point in writing this book? And then the more work I did on myself, the more I realized it's actually irrelevant. Whether people buy my book or not is irrelevant. I wrote my book for my own purpose. My purpose is to help as many people as I can. It's not to help 1 million people. If I do, fantastic. It's not to help 1,000 people. It's to help as many people as I can. And I will work as hard as I can to help as many as I can. That could be 2. Mm-hmm. But if that's as many as I can and I achieve that, well, fantastic. What I do know now is that I will work as hard as I have to help as many as I can. And what number that ends up being at the end of my time, I'll know that I did everything I could to reach those people. So yes, I have faced imposter syndrome. I don't think I did in the police very much, but certainly coming through this process, in particular, having struggled and having a big addiction and having my name thrown through the paper and losing respect for myself, losing confidence in myself, losing my reputation, that certainly made things a hell of a lot harder to accept that I could help somebody in the future. But I moved past that now. I did the work required to get there. And if I help 1, fantastic. If I help 1 million, even better.
So I guess the answer to the better 2 question is, even though it was a hard time, you don't regret it, do you? Well, I mean, you don't necessarily regret it because you turned out on the other side in a lot better position.
Yeah, it's what I love about your podcast and the podcast question and the premise of it is that it's a question I have constantly asked myself for 5 years. And there is absolutely no doubt that if I could have arrived at the point I am now via a different path, I would have preferred to arrive here via a different path. Was that possible? Yes, it was possible. Was I capable of that at the time? No. I deeply regret everybody that I've hurt along the way. And I wish it didn't happen that way. But I do say a line that, it's a little, it's a little tongue in cheek, but I lost $2 million, my career, my reputation, very nearly my life. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That statement doesn't denigrate anybody that I hurt or the mistakes that I made along the way, but I have to accept that is my path, and I am so grateful that I took it.
And that says a lot about who you are and who you've become, because you can look at it and say, yeah, okay, I did this, but I made it through. And I accept what happened. Yeah.
And I have an ability to use it now. I wasn't living my best life. I wasn't living a fulfilled life. I had a lot of good things in my life. I had a lot of love. I had a lot of money. I had, those sorts of things, but I didn't have me. I was doing things that weren't me. It doesn't mean that they were all not me. It's just that it wasn't really who I was meant to be. And I feel a lot closer to who I was meant to be now. And again, if I could have done it a different way, I wish I had have done it a different way, but I didn't. I'm grateful for the way that I did it, because I'm still here and I've got an ability to help people.
All your social links will be on the podcast, on the narration. If there's one thing you could leave, if you could say to my audience, what would it be?
Be brutally honest with yourself. Don't just be honest with yourself. Ask yourself tough questions. Give yourself hard answers and continue to ask the question. Your first answer is probably a lie. Be brutal about it. Even if you think it might offend some people, even if you think it might go against what you've lived for up until this point, you have to be honest with yourself. Everything flows from being honest with yourself.
Well, I thank you, Gary. This has been a very fascinating conversation. I think this is the longest podcast I have done. So I thank you. So if you made it to the other side of the conversation, I hope you find it fascinating. I mean, I had to dig into the Bodyguard stuff because I was curious, because how things are portrayed in movies are not always necessarily the case. So you have to look a little deeper than things. I remember in the 80s, New Orleans accents in movies were so bad because they were always portrayed like this. We were talking like this, like, oh my gosh. But the fact of the matter is, when I left New Orleans and moved to Shreveport, where there was more of a country twang at the time, I got accused of being from New York. So we did not have the typical Southern voice. We had a more New York sounding voice. And, I didn't think I had an accent, but when I go home now, yeah, I do know I have an accent. But I wanted to dive deep into what makes somebody want to do this and the psychological aspects of it. So I hope that resonated with you guys as well. And I think he has a lot of fascinating thoughts about being honest with ourselves and taking a hard look at ourselves and where we're going. What does success look like, and how do we survive success? Do we, and the other fascinating thing to me was talking about the resolution, making these big moments. Maybe we need to start appreciating just every day and taking it as the gift and being thankful for it. Back to being thankful. I'm thankful to have this platform. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Like I said, we have Patreon, we have a Twitter account, we have a Facebook account, we have an Instagram account. So if you have a question, reach out, send me an email, however you feel comfortable contacting us, please do so. And if you have a better two moment, by all means, drop me a line and we'll make something happen. Okay. So take care, enjoy season 3, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.